السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the book of al-Murbi, شرح زاد المستقنع, and we're still in the second type of water, which is al-Tahir, the pure in itself but does not purify others, is not to be used for wudu or ghusl. And we're towards the end of what's mentioned about this part, which is here, as you see in page 82 in this specific version, which is, as he says, أو غمس فيه يد قائم من نوم ليل ناقد لوضوء, where the water that is yasir, which is qalil, which is less than qullatin, if it's in a container and someone dips his hands in it after sleeping a night sleep, that as a result of that, he's not in state of wudu. So if he immerses his hand in such a container, then the water becomes tahir and not tahur. That means you can remove najasa with it, impurities, physical impurities, but you cannot use this water to make wudu. Becomes tahir, comes from the second category. And I would just go back and read, and if you have it with you without going up and looking at the Zad al-Mustaqni', the matn, the one in red, from the beginning of al-Tahir, just to make sure that we're following the sequence of things. So it starts with him saying, وَإِن تَغَيَّرَ طَعْمُهُ أَوْ لَوْنُهُ أَوْ رِيحُهُ بِطَبْخٍ أَوْ سَاقِطٍ فِيهِ أَوْ رُفِعَ بِقَلِيلِهِ نجاسة أو رفع بقليله حدث أو غمس فيه يد قائم. So now this is the part that we're in. We're talking about قليل. القليل is the less than the قلتين. أو غمس فيه يد قائم من نوم ليل ناقد لوضوء. He says here قبل غسلها ثلاثا, before washing it outside the container 3 times. If that's the case, then the water is tahir. So as you see here, there are conditions mentioned. So here, when he said that the water has to be qalil, so this is not any type of water. So this is qalil. It has to be small amount of water. And what is small is less than qullatin. The second condition mentioned here is that the hand, is immersed in it. So, and this is kullu yad. That means the entire hand is immersed in it. Also that, a Muslim, so he has to be a Muslim. And this is where the subject of whether the command here is ta'abbudi or there is a reason for it other than the fact that this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if it's a command, who are the ones that are addressed by this? Are the Muslimin. So if it's a kafir, then the water is not tahir, it's still tahur. This is again if the command here is ta'abbudi. And the matter, of course, the jumhur of the ulama, just to put this on the side, and another riwayah, Imam Ahmad, and this is what the contemporary scholars and Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah are upon the opinion that does not change the status of the water, right? So means that it keeps it tahur. But anyway, so according to here, what we're reading here, so it has to be ma' qalil. The hand has to be immersed. It has to be a Muslim mukallaf. That means if it's a child, then it doesn't change the status of the water. It has to be from night sleep. Cannot be from anything else. Not the day sleep. And of course, it's naqid the wudu. That means it breaks the wudu. So that means he completely slept. And this is before washing it 3 times. If it's washed 3 times outside the container, then also it doesn't change the status of the water. So with all of these conditions, then it's fatahir. It's tahir and not tahur. He says here in the sharh, نوى الغسل بذلك الغمس أو لا. So as long as all these conditions are met, it doesn't matter whether he has the intention to wash his hands with this ghams. Al-ghams is the immerse, is the dipping the hand in the water. Whether he intended to wash his hands with this ghams, with this dipping his hand in the water or not, it doesn't matter. There's no niyyah here is required. So that means if it happened that he put his hands, his entire hand in that container by mistake, then the ruling applies. That means it becomes tahir with the different conditions that are mentioned. وَكَذَا إِذَا حَصَلَ الْمَاءُ فِي كُلِّهَا. The same thing if the water حصل, established or happened, في كلها, in all of it, meaning what is meant by that is, which is a kind of strange situation, but we have the normal situation here that a person dips his hand in a container. But here, this statement means that if the water happened to cover the entire hand outside the container, so that water that get detached from the hand, it's tahir, right? So because this hand, a person woke up from a night's sleep and he's not in state of wudu, he did not immerse it in the container, but if he washes his hand outside, that water that drips from that washing, it's also tahir, not tahur. So because it's used, that's basically what this sentence means. He says, وَلَوْ بَاتَتْ مَكْتُوفَةً أو في جراب ونحو. Even ولو باتت مكتوفة. باتت, one of the most important things when you're going through the mutun of the ulama is to make sure that you understand or you refer the dhamir to where it refers to. So the dhamir, what does it refer to? So batat, what's batat? Al-bat is when something spends the night. So if his hands batat, so this refers, the ta here refers to the hands. وَلَوْ بَاتَتْ مَكْتُوفَةً. So if the hands were during the night maktufa, while he was sleeping, maktufa, that means it's tight. Even if it was tight, that means he knows exactly where his hands were, because the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, as he's going to mention here, لا يدري أين باتت يده, because you don't know where your hands has been during the night. So a person would say, but I know where my hands were. No, you don't, because you were asleep. So even if it's tight, because it might be something we know or something that we do not know. أو في جراب ونحوه. جراب, a bag. Someone put his hand in a glove or in a bag or anything like this. If he sleeps with a glove and he wakes up, and then he takes the gloves off, right? And before he slept, he was in state of wudu. And then when he woke up, he took the gloves off. Can he immerse the hands in the container? The answer is no. It gives the same ruling. Because of the hadith, he mentioned the dalil. إذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه فليغسل يديه قبل أن يدخلهما في الإناء 3 فإن أحدكم لا يدري أين باتت يده. رواه مسلم. إذا استيقظ أحدكم, if one of you, أحدكم, one of you, استيقظ, woke up, من نومه, from his sleep, فليغسل يديه, and let him wash his hands, قبل أن يدخلهما في الإناء 3, before he يدخلهما, before he enter both of them, double tense, في الإناء, in the container, 3 times. So to wash them outside the container 3 times. فإن أحدكم, then the Prophet ﷺ mentioned the wisdom behind that. فإن أحدكم لا يدري, because one of you do not know, أين باتت يده, where his hands has been. Batat is a specific term, refers to the night time when a person sleeps. If a person sleeps during the day, the word batat is not going to be used. وَالَّذِينَ يَبِيتُونَ لِرَبِّهِمْ سُجَّدًا وَقِيَامًا, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned about the believers with their night prayer. So here this is what the hadith says, and this is all with the conditions that we mentioned, container and small amount of water, and it's a Muslim, and so on. And the majority of the ulama, but what I'm saying that is from the practical point of view. If someone has been doing it, he doesn't have to repeat his wudu or anything. That's fine. But that does not affect our studying of the book. You're not going to be asked, inshallah ta'ala, or you're not responsible at this stage as to what you think based on the evidences or which opinion that you adopt in this case. No, we're taking what's in the book. And if he mentions in the road some of the differences, then we acknowledge that, inshallah ta'ala. So the madhab here that the water becomes tahir. Tahir. That means it's not to be used for wudu if these conditions are mentioned. Then he says, وَلَا أَثَرَ لِغَمْسِ يَدِ كَافِرٍ وَصَغِيرٍ وَمَجْنُونٍ وَقَائِمٍ. Now, since we mentioned these conditions, so now what is excluded because of these conditions? وَلَا أَثَرْ, no effect. Athar is tradition or a trace, right? Depends on the context. So here, لا أثر, that means no effect. For the ruling. لغمس يد كافر, if the hand of a disbeliever was dipped in the water. وصغير, and a small child. ومجنون, or someone that is insane. وقائم من النوم. Why? Because they're not مكلفين, they're not addressed by these rulings because they're either kafir or small or insane. وقائم من النوم نهار, someone got up from a day sleep. أو ليل إذا كان نومه يسيرا لا ينقض الوضوء. Or he slept during the night, but the nawm, the sleep was yasir, was a very light sleep, does not break the wudu. And what breaks the wudu is the sleep that is considered to be deep sleep, meaning a person is not aware of his surroundings. If people speak next to him, he would not hear them. He would not hear them. So now, also with some of the قيود or things to make it specific. والمراد باليد هنا إلى الكوع. What is meant by the hand here is إلى الكوع. الكوع is the الرزغ, or basically just the palm. Just the palm, not the entire hand all the way to the elbows, right? So just the palm. And this is what the كوع is, the wrist. He says ويستعمل هذا الماء إذا لم يوجد غيره ثم يتيمم. Then if this is the only water that he has, ويستعمل هذا الماء, then to use it إن لم يوجد غيره, if there is no other water than this. That means he would use it for wudu or ghusl. So this is an exception if it's the only water that he has. If he has more water, then he pour this away, or he use it for removing najasa or impurities, but he does not use it for wudu or ghusl. Unless this is the only water that he has, then he use it for wudu, for example, ثم يتيمم, then to make tayammum, to be on the safe side, that if the water was not feasible for him to use. Clear? So this is ويستعمل هذا الماء إذا لم يوجد غيره, if there's no غيره, if there's no other than this water, ثم يتيمم, then he is to make tayammum afterwards. وكذا means and the same. وكذا ما غسل in the passive tense. And the same thing with whatever has been washed به, the water basically, and the same thing with the water that has been used to wash الذكر والأنثيان لخروج مذي دونه. الذكر والأنثيان is the male private parts, all of it. لخروج مذي دونه, as a result of madhi that came out. And the madhi is, as we will talk about it inshallah ta'ala in the subject of al-najasa, which is najis, it's impure, which is this transparent secretion that comes as a result of the desire, but it's not the seminal fluid. So it's so the water that is used to clean oneself, private part like this, is also falls into the same category. But here it's not touching the madhi. It's not touching the madhi because the madhi is najis. So this is different. لخروج مذي دونه before that. So that means this becomes طاهر but not طهور if the private part is used, is washed with it, but without najasa, without touching najasa or impurities. لأنه في معناه, because it has the same meaning, same ruling. وأما ما غسل به المذي فعلى ما يأتي. And as for وأما, as for the water that is used to wash al-madhi, then فعلى ما يأتي, it's different. فعلى ما يأتي, that means it's going to be as it's going to come, which is in the third categories of water, which is najasa. Right? So here, these two lines here with the private part. If water is used to wash the private part without having najasa coming from the private part, any impurities coming, any secretion from the private part, that water that get detached is not to be used for wudu or ghusl. But it's still tahir, it's still pure, that can be used for removing impurities and so on, but not for tahara, not for wudu or ghusl. But if the water is used to wash the madhi itself, so that means the madhi, even though you might not see it, but it's used to wash the madhi, that detached water, then it's najis, as it's going to be mentioned in the third category. And again, when you study the matters of fiqh like this, and again, if you're at ease, alhamdulillah, that we just open the tap water and you make wudu, many of these rulings, they don't apply. But the deen of al-Islam and the rulings apply in every situation, in every circumstance, at all times, till the day of judgment. And the norm of many people is that they use containers to make wudu and tahara from. So this is with regards to the waking up at night to use a container of water to make wudu or ghusl, and the different masail in it here. And then after that, he says, أو means we're still counting the number of cases here that are mentioned for the tahir, for the second categories of water. أو كان آخر غسلة زالت النجاسة بها فطاهر. This is what زاد al-Mustaqni. أو, or one of the types of the tahir water, which is, again, it's not tahur, it's tahir. كان آخر غسلة. It's the last غسلة. غسلة is one, right? So you have al-ghusl is what's known to take a shower to cover the entire body with the water. Al-ghusl is the water, is the exact water that a person would use for washing. Ghasla is one washing. One washing doesn't have to be the same ghusl as covering the entire body with water. Just one washing of anything. Ghasla can be to a hand, to anything. So أو كان آخر غسلة زالت النجاسة بها. The last washing, that the najasa, the impurity, is removed by it. آخر غسلة. That means when you're washing something impure, like, for example, as it will come, inshallah ta'ala, the saliva of the dog 7 times, and the first time with dust. So the 7th washing of water, this is the last ghasla, this is the last washing. Or you're removing impurity from a piece of cloth, for example, with your hands, hand washing. So you kept putting water on it, and the water keeps on coming out impure. The color is changed because of the impurity, till the last portion of water, that when you clean the piece of cloth, it comes out clean. The water comes out clean. This is what is meant here. أو كان آخر غسلة زالت النجاسة بها. The najasa is removed by the last one. Not that you keep on pouring water and then it becomes clean. That's clean. But it's the last one, that the najasa is removed by the last one, but nothing changed in the water, in the characteristics of the water. وانفصل غير متغير. That means this water get detached, انفصل, and it's not changed as a result of the najasa, because it's the last one. That means things become clean. Then it's fatahir, tahir. This small amount of water that get detached here, it's tahir, not tahur. Why? He says لأن المنفصل بعض المتصل والمتصل طاهر. لأن المنفصل, because what's انفصل, المنفصل is the one that is detached, is بعض المتصل, is some of what's been attached. It's some of what's already been attached, which is the najis. والمتصل طاهر. And what's attached is طاهر. Right? And what's attached is clean. طاهر, but not طهور. That means the water that get detached is طاهر and not طهور. So this is the last washing. And of course, if the water didn't get detached, so that's what I mean. But here now got detached. If it got detached, then it's impure. Of course, it's clean. But because it's been used to remove khabath, that means it becomes tahir. This is what is meant here by that statement. Now we finished the second type of water, which is al-tahir. So if you go back to the Zad al-Mustaqni' and we read what's mentioned there, we would say that وَإِن تَغَيَّرَ طَعْمُهُ أَوْ لَوْنُهُ, if his taste, if the taste of the water or the color or أو or its smell changed بطبخ, by something being cooked in it, أو ساقط فيه, or something fell in it, أو رفع بقليله حدث, or small amount of it, less than قلتين, removed the حدث, changed the حدث, أو غمس, that means this is the used water, الماء المستعمل, أو غمس فيه يد قائم من نوم ليل ناقض لوضوء, this last statement, أو كان آخر غسلة زالت النجاسة بها فطاهر. All of that is طاهر, and that's the different types of the طاهر type of water. Then after that, he starts with talking about النوع الثالث, the third type, which is النجس. النجس, which is the impurity. He says here, I would read first the matn of Zad al-Mustaqni'. He says, وَالنَّجِسُ مَا تَغَيَّرَ بِنَجَاسَةٍ. النجس ما تغير بنجاسة أو لاقاها وهو يسير أو انفصل عن محل نجاسة قبل زوالها، فإن أضيف إلى الماء النجس طهور كثير غير تراب ونحوه، أو زال تغير النجس الكثير بنفسه، أو نزح منه فبقي بعده كثير غير متغير طهر. And more of the مسائل there. But the first part of the مسائل here that we want to focus on inshallah ta'ala today, والنجس, النجس ما تغير بنجاسة أو لاقاها وهو يسير أو انفصل عن محل نجاسة قبل زوالها. This is the type of najasat without specifically mentioning about the types of najasat. This is going to be mentioned later. What are the impurities? We're not talking about what are the impurities yet. We're talking about the category of water that is considered to be impure or najis. So he says here in the sharh, النجس وهو المشار إليه بقوله. This is the third type, which is the impure, and najis means the impure. And he refers to it by saying, then he mentioned that the mustaqni' والنجس ما تغير بنجاسة. What is the water that is najis? What has been count? Number one, what has been changed by najasa. So water that is normal water, you put najasa in it, and the najasa changed the water. Then this water is najis. Then this water is impure, because it changed as a result of najasa fell in it. He says قليلا كان أو كثيرا. Whether the water is qalil or kathir. Do we need to know what's qalil and kathir again? We already know that, right? We established what's qalil and what's kathir in water. It's not the urf. It's not the norm. It's not what people perceive. It's the subject of al-qullatin. Clear? طيب. So whether the water is less or more, if it's changed as a result of najasa falling in it, you have a swimming pool, and a najasa fell in the swimming pool. And as a result of that, the swimming pool water changed. Changed as a result of that. That means this water, the entire water becomes najis, impure. The next section that I read some of it is how to remove the najasa. That's something else. Can you clean it? Yes, there are ways to give the ruling that now it's clean. But now we're talking about that it becomes najis as a result of that. وحكى ابن المنذر الإجماع عليه. ابن المنذر in his book of al-Ijma' he narrated al-Ijma', which is the consensus of the ulama. There's no differences of opinion here. Whether the water is lots of water or less amount of water, it's najis if it gets changed by najasa falling in it. This is the reason why it got changed. أو. So أو means or. So this is number 2. So number 2, أو لاقاها. لاقاها, اللقيا is to meet something. من كان يرجو لقاء الله فإن أجل الله لآت. Whoever hope to meet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the meeting with Allah is coming. So لاقاها, and the ألف here, the ضمير, refers to the najasa. That's why he says أي لاقى النجاسة. That means the water met the najasa. Because there is differences between najasa falling into the water or the water get poured on a najasa. And if it's poured on a najasa, then it flows away. Or imagine, for example, you have a najasa in a place, and then you pour water on it. This water falls into a cup, for example. Now what's the ruling of this water? أو لاقى النجاسة وهو يسير. If this water is yasir, now we use sometimes yasir, we use sometimes qalil, and it's the same thing. What is yasir? دون القلتين, less than the قلتين. فينجس بمجرد الملاقاة. Then he becomes najis, this water becomes impure, right when it gets al-mulaqah, once it touches it, once they meet. Once the water meets the najasa, then the water becomes najis, becomes impure. And of course, on the najasa, it's obvious. And also, if it gets detached from the najasa, this water is impure because it's yasir. Because it's not kathir, it's not lots of water, it's yasir. ولو جاريا. ولو جاريا, even if it's jari, even if it's running, even if it's running water. Right? Even if it's running water, and of course the water can either be stagnant or not moving versus running. If it's small, they say, then it's still the rulings are the same. So, and this is usually when he says walau, even it is, when he says here in the sharh, walau jariyan, that's not in the mat. This is obvious. If the water meets the najasa, poured on the najasa, and the water is yasir or qalil, then the water is najis. But then walau jariyan, the Imam al-Buhuti rahimahullah, when he says something like this, that means there's some differences of opinions in the madhab, or there's different riwayat. So there's another riwayah by Imam Ahmad that the al-jari is not the same as the non-jari. Al-jari is the running water, even if it's less, because it's running, so it does not have the same ruling, even if it's less than qullatin, because it's running, keeps on changing, moving. He says لمفهوم hadith, but he says here even if it's jari. So what's in the book here is that, and this is what's well known in the madhab, that if it's jari, that means it's najis. لمفهوم حديث إذا بلغ الماء قلتين لم ينجسه شيء. Because of the mafhum, the understanding of the hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, إذا بلغ الماء قلتين, if the water reaches القلتين لم ينجسه شيء, nothing would impurify it, meaning if nothing changed in it. And we talked about the قلتين before. So since it's less than قلتين, that means النجاسة, it met najasa, that means it becomes najis. That's the mafhum. The mantuq, or what the hadith says, لم ينجسه شيء إذا بلغ الماء قلتين. And remember the meaning of the hadith. So إذا بلغ الماء قلتين, if the water reaches قلتين, لم ينجسه شيء, it doesn't mean that it would never be impure, because if it's not قلتين, if it's 100 قلة, if it's the biggest swimming pool ever, and one of its characteristics is changed as a result of najasa falling in it, what's the hukm of this water? Is najis. This is ijma', this is consensus, there's no differences of opinions here. So what does the hadith refers to? Refers if a najasa falls and nothing changed. This is where the differences of opinions and the qullatain versus the non-qullatain. If the water is less than qullatain, I'm repeating again the matter so that it's clear. If the water is less than qullatain and the najasa falls in it and nothing changed, according to the madhab, the water is impure and it's not to be used. If it's changed, whether it's less or more, it doesn't matter. If it's more than qullatain, if the najasa falls in it and nothing changed in the water, this is the meaning of lam yunajjishu shay, then it is not impure. It's to be considered pure because it's more than qullatain. Okay, so the only differences of opinions here, if it's less than qullatain and najasa falls and nothing changed in the water, the madhab says the water is impure, it's not to be used, even though nothing changed in it. The other opinion, which is Sheikh Santami and others and so on, is that the water is pure because nothing changed. But this is where the mas'ala here is upon. So أو لاقاها وهو يسير. So the first type of najasa, إن تغير أو ما تغير بنجاسة, if the water changed by najasa, this is obvious. أو لاقاها, or it met najasa, وهو يسير, and the amount of water is يسير, not much. The third one, أو. So this is the third type. أو انفصل عن محل نجاسة. أو انفصل. The previous one لاقى, met. So it becomes najis once it meets the najasa, the impurity. The third one, which is part of what we understand from the second one, is أو انفصل. If the water gets detached from the place of najasa. So that means it met the najasa and then it left. So it get detached. That water is najis. But then he says mutaghayyiran. It get detached from the najasa and it's changed as a result of being poured on the najasa. So of course this water is najis. أو قبل زوالها. So انفصل, that means it get detached, or قبل زوالها, or before the removal of the najasa. Or before the removal of the najasa, then فنجس. Then فنجس. So one of the najis water is what got detached before the najasa is removed, or before the removal of the exact najasa. So we have the hukm of the najasa and we have the ayn al-najasa. Right? We have the ayn al-najasa, that means this physical najasa being that you see it. You see the najasa. And you keep on pouring water on it. And the water comes out not changed, but it keeps on touching the najasa, and you see the najasa. It's not like you don't see it, it's right there. So this water has the same ruling as if the najasa is being removed, but the water is changed. So this is أو انفصل عن محل نجاسة متغيرا أو قبل زوالها, or before it get removed, فنجس. Because again, this is a small amount of water that it keeps on being contaminated with the najasa. Therefore, he says, فَمَنْ فَصَلَ قَبْلَ السَّابِعَةِ نَجِسٍ. Whatever get detached before the seventh washing, then it's najis. It doesn't matter whether the water is changed or not. It's najis, because if it's 7 washing, from 1 to 6, any water detached is najis. But the 7th, then if it comes out clean, then it's what? Tahir, as mentioned in the previous type, and not tahur, tahir only. Clear? He says, وَكَذَا مَنْ فَصَلَ قَبْلَ زَوَالِ عَيْنِ النَّجَاسِ وَلَوْ بَعْدَهَا أَوْ مُتَغَيِّرٍ. And the same ruling applies if the water get detached before the removal of عَيْنِ النَّجَاسِ, before the removal of the exact najasa, the physical najasa. ولو بعدها أو متغير, or if it even after that, or أو متغيرا, or if it's changed. All of that is najis. All of that is najis because the water get detached from the najasa. So this is the different types of the najasa. Then more masail comes here. Let's take this one here, inshallah. Hopefully it's clear. He says, فَإِنْ أُضِيفَ إِلَى الْمَاءِ النَّجِسِ طَهُورٌ كَثِيرٌ. That's the al-Mustaqni. فَإِنْ أُضِيفَ. So if أضيف in the passive tense from al-idafa, if you add, if there's water added to the impure water, فَإِنْ أُضِيفَ إِلَى الْمَاءِ النَّجِسِ. Now we have impurity. قليلا كان أو كثيرا, whether it's small amount of impurity or lots of it. But if you add to it طهور كثير, طهور is what? Is the water that is طهور, that you can use for wudu. And it's كثير, lots of water, more than قلتين. And how would you do that? بصب, whether you pour lots of water on it. So you have small amount of water that is najis, or doesn't matter, water that is najis, water that is impure. This is how to remove the najasa from it. So if you pour on it, this is one of the ways to remove the najasa. You put a whole bunch of tahur water. بصب, al-sab is to pour. أو إجراء ساقية. الساقية is the thing that rotates and to bring the water from under the earth. إليه ونحو ذلك, and the like of it. Something like you have a hose to add water to it. Whatever means that you would add water to the impure water. طهر. And it's a طهور كثير, then the water becomes pure. Because obviously the najasa would be removed, and if the characteristics are clear, then it changes with lots of tahur water, so that cleans it, that purifies it. He says لأن هذا القدر المضاف, because this portion قدر المضاف that is added يدفع النجاسة عن نفسه, pushes away the najasa from itself, وعما اتصل به, and also what's been attached to it. So this is one of the ways to remove the najasa. You pour clean water, and then the water changes to be clean again, so the water is clean, even it has originally najasa in it. But then there's an exception. غير تراب ونحوه. But other than the turab. If it's turab, if it's dust, sand, and the like of that, then فلا يطهر به najis. The najis does not get clean by pouring lots of water on it, meaning the dust or the sand still there. So the sand is not changed. Versus the water becomes pure, but not the sand. أو زال تغير الماء النجس الكثير بنفسه. Another way of the purification. And after you finish this, you can kind of put numbers to it so that it's easy to remember these cases. Or the water, أو زال تغير الماء, or the change of the water get removed, النجس, that is impure, and it was lots of water. بنفسه. بنفسه, that means by its own self. So there was najasa in lots of water, kathir, and it's very clear, and it's changed its characteristics. And then after some time, you come back after a week or so, and the water is clean again, evaporated, whatever there is. Then the water is back again to its original state, which is tahur. من غير إضافة ولا نزح, without adding anything, without removing it, just to change by itself. Then it becomes clean. So this is the second way of cleaning. أو نزح منه. النزح is when you remove the najasa, but it more refers to like some work is being done. Whether it's sweeping it in a way, removing it. أي من النجس الكثير. If you remove the najasa from the النجس الكثير, the lots of najasa, it get removed. فبقي بعده أي بعد المنزوح. So if you remove the najasa from the water, and what stays after that in the water, بعد المنزوح, after the منزوح, which is نزح, after what has been removed from it, which is najasa, كثير, what's left is كثير, is more than the قلتين. غير متغير, not been changed, that means its characteristics of the water is good. طهر, then it becomes clean, that means you purified it. طهر means, that means it wasn't pure and now it's pure. So this is another way of purifying the water that had najasa in it. You remove the najasa physically, and the water that is left is more than qullatin, and it's the characteristics of it is back to the normal characteristics of water. Then we say that this water is pure, is tahur. He says لزوال علة تنجسه, because the illah of التنجس or najasa is removed, which is the mulaqat al-najasa, or the najasa has been thrown in there. وهي التغير, which is the change. So since the change is removed, as a result of removing the najasa, that means the water is tahur. والمنزوح الذي زال مع نزحه التغير طهور إن لم تكن عين النجاسة به. المنزوح. المنزوح is the water that get removed as a result of trying to remove the najasa. That get removed with nazhihi, with removing the najasa. So the najasa is there, so you remove the najasa and a whole bunch of water with it. Right? So what's the ruling of that water that get removed with the najasa? It's tahur. That means it's the first category. That means you can use it for wudu. إِن لَمْ تَكُنْ عَيْنُ النَّجَاسَةِ بِهِ, if the najasa is not physically there. Okay, so al-manzuh, what has been removed, then it's tahur. Kathir, and it has to be kathir also, as long as the najasa is not there. Then he says, وَإِن كَانَ النَّجِسُ قَلِيلًا. Again, it's many masail here, but it's inshallah it's easy as long as make sure inshallah that you understand every mas'ala in it. We'll kind of summarize it afterwards inshallah, or next time we'll see inshallah. وَإِن كَانَ النَّجِسُ قَلِيلًا. If the najis is qalil, that means now there is najis kathir and there is najis qalil. قليلا أو كثيرا, whether it's small or lots of it, the najasa itself. مجتمعا من متنجس يسير. So najasa here, you have one water that is najis and another container of water that is najis. Each one of them alone is yasir, is small, right? And then mujtami', that means you mix them together. So najis with najis. So not just one water, but two containers of water, you mix them. Doesn't matter what najasa in it, but they're both najis. فَتَطْهِيرُهُ, how to clean this? بِإِضَافَةِ كَثِيرٍ, by adding kathir, by adding lots of water that is more than kullatayn. مع زوال تغيره إن كان, with of course the removal of the change, if there was a change. So it kind of the like of the first one. Then ولا يجب غسل جوانب بئر نزحت للمشقة. It is not obligatory to wash the sides of a well نزحت. The water has been removed from it because of najasa. للمشقة, because it's difficult. For example, there was najasa in the well, and while they're removing the najasa, and they remove the najasa, and the water that stays there is pure, we know that for sure. But then the sides of the well has some splattered water on it when they were removing it, and it can be najis or not. So to wash and to make it as an obligation to wash the entire sides of the well, this is a very difficult task. So that means it's not mandatory. It's a small amount of thing, it might be, might not be there, so it's okay as a matter of the ease because of the mashaqqa, because of the difficulty. One last statement here that is going to take us, and if you studied or you remember what we mentioned first in the beginning, in the last few sessions, تنبيه here, that means it's like alert or a note. محل ما ذكر, which is important to mention here. إن لم تكن النجاسة بول أدمي. If the najasa here, we're talking about najasa, we didn't talk about what are the types of the najasas yet. But if the najasa is not human urine or feces, Because as we mentioned before, the madhab separates or differentiate between the najasat, all of it, versus if the najasa is urine or feces from the human beings. فَتَطْهِيرُ مَا تَنَجَّسَ بِهِمَا مِنَ الْمَاءِ. So the way to purify what is contaminated with it, with the water, إضافة ما يشق نزحه إليه. To remove what is difficult to remove. أو نزح يبقى بعده ما يشق نزحه. Or to remove what, and then what stays afterwards is difficult to remove. أو زوال تغير ما يشق نزحه بنفسه. Or the removal of something that changed the water, but it's difficult to remove it in itself. على قول أكثر المتقدمين ومن تبعهم على ما تقدم. So all of what's mentioned about the mashaqqa, if something is left after removing, you remove the najasa, and there's still something that is very difficult, water to remove the splatters of water, or something that is after putting, of course, abundance of things, and of course with the condition that the change has been removed, the change of the characteristics of the water, but to remove, to make sure that every single part of it that is completely removed, that becomes very difficult, as the example of the well here. We're talking about the well, but except if the najasa here is bawl or avira, then it's different. Then you have to wash it. That's basically what he's trying to say here. And this is the opinion of many of the mutaqaddimin. Right? So, and we'll stop here, inshallah ta'ala, for this time. But here, as you see, going back and just to summarize it, to remove the najasa here, we're talking about removing the najasa. If the water is yasir, less than qullatin, it has only one way to remove the najasa, and that is to add lots of water to it. Clear? That's the only way to remove the najasa, is to add lots of water in it, because if it's yasir and you remove the najasa, it's yasir. So we cannot give the ruling of it that it's tahur, because it's yasir. It's less than qullatin. Right? Even if the change of the water, the characteristics of the water is back to normal, is according to the madhab. So it has to add to it lots of water. If it's the water is only qullatin, right, not more than qullatin, then you add lots of water to it, and the water, the najasa changes to pure, then it's pure. Or it changes by itself. Then also it's pure. If it's more than qullatin, then either the first case or the second case, which is add lots of water and it changes, it get changed by itself, or that you remove physically the najasa, and what stays after it is kathir, and it's abundance of water. That means then the water is now clean. And al-mashaqqa, or the difficulty, then it doesn't matter, or it's not obligation to remove it in this case. Right? So I hope this is clear. And if it's not, read it again. Try to put the masail together and see if you have any questions, inshallah. And we'll stop here in وَإِن شَكَّ فِي نَجَاسَةِ مَاءٍ أَوْ غَيْرِ, if a person is in doubt whether the water is najis or not. The attendance code is Yasir and Kathir. Yasir and Kathir, whether it's in Arabic or small amount, abundant amount. طيب, جزاكم الله خيرا. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless our sessions always, and وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.